with or without you.
Hey, you guys give him a round of applause. Didn't he do a good job? With or without you. Hey guys, my name is Kevin Scott, and I am excited to be here. I am glad that Lunch with a Leader is back. How many of you are excited that Lunch with a Leader is back? How many of you that's sad because it means summer is over? Anybody in that boat? Okay. I'm excited because this is really an event about developing leaders, and we've been talking about on this journey that Mike's been taking us on, the fact that when a leader gets better, everybody wins. That it's good for our organizations, it's good for our businesses, it's good for our communities, it's good for our schools, and it's good for our churches. So if this is your first time, real quick, this is your first time at a Lunch with a Leader event? Raise your hand. Wow, that is awesome. Well, I'm so glad you're here. We like to tell you this is a selfish event. I know that sounds bad when we talk about servant leadership, to be selfish, but this is an event for you to soak up, for you to get things that are going to help you get better to lead the organizations that you're in. Now, here's what I want to ask you to do. I want you to stand up real quick for me. I know you're eating. We got food on your hands. Hopefully you got something to wipe them off with in a minute, because I want to ask you to do me a favor. I want you to find 8 people that you don't know, give them a high five, welcome them to Lunch with a Leader. 8 people. All right, as you guys are making your way back to your seat, want to say thanks again for North Star for hosting this event. Special thank you to Andy Duncan and the Chick-fil-A team that provided lunch today for free. Would you guys thank them? As I said just a minute ago, this is a day for leaders to get better. And Mike has been taking us on a journey through the life of David and talking about how we can grow as leaders so that we can be the leaders that God has created us to be in our community. So I want to make sure you should have a pen on your table. You should have some notes. Make sure you grab those out. You're going to get some great insight today to walk away with. Would you guys do me a huge favor and give a warm welcome to Pastor Mike Lynch?
Thanks, Kevin. Well, it is so good to see you guys, and we have been looking forward to getting this going and getting this back off the ground. It's funny, you get done in May and you're like, June, July. My worry was, we worry like this is what church people do, all right? And so I'm like, I hope people remember it, all right? By August, I hope people hadn't forgot it. Christmas Eve, you always worry that you've seen everybody you know by the end of the second service, and if you have multiple services. So thank you for coming today, because it is great to see you. As Kevin said, we've been on this journey through the life of David. Our goal, if we go back and we to go back a little bit in the story, we began this because we really felt like if we're going to change our world and we're going to change our communities, we're going to do it through the leaders that God has put where He's put. And we use this phrase every time we meet. God has put you where He's put you for a reason bigger than you. Now, part of that is figuring out why we're there. Figuring out why He put us there. Figuring out, okay, God, for this season, for this time, in this place, why am I here? And what is it that You have for me? And so rather than us just do something that we can learn a little bit here and learn a bit there, let's take a character of Scripture. If God's got a pretty good idea of what leadership looks like, let's take a person in Scripture, let's break apart their lives, and let's see their goods and the bads. And here's one of the things you'll learn about the Bible if you're new to the Bible. Here's what's really good about it. Everything in here is full of goods and bads. There's not a character that's mentioned other than Jesus that didn't have flaws in their story. How many of you as a leader, there's things you're not as good at as you are other things? Raise your hand. How many of y'all have ever made a mistake before? How many of you hope most people never hear about your mistake? Raise your hand. All of these people, they got it captured, right? And so these guys' mistakes are broadcast, and we know them. David is a perfect example. He begins his life being overlooked by his dad. So here's his dad. His dad gets to have this prophet come by his house to choose the next king, and the dad brings out every son but David. David was the run of the litter. David was out tending the sheep. David was out doing his job, and his dad's like, well, yeah, there is one. It's my little boy David, and he goes out and gets David, and you remember the prophet said, he is the one that I'm looking for, because God doesn't look at the outward appearance. Our very first lesson, God looks at the what? Heart. God looks inside. So sometimes you may be in a role and you're like, I'm not who I need to be. I'm not what I'm supposed to be. I'm not the person. Listen, God doesn't look at the exterior. God looks at the interior, and he sees who you can be. And David begins this journey, and David, this guy, this kid that was forgotten by his father, begins this journey that we've walked on. We found David going out to the battlefield against this giant that we'll talk about today named Goliath. We found David going out there. David wasn't supposed to be at the battlefield. David wasn't a warrior. We learn that spiritual leaders are obedient when nobody's watching. They're not just obedient when life is good. They're obedient when nobody's even paying attention to them. And David ends up being in a place, put into a position for a time that we all know the story. Even somebody who doesn't go to church probably has heard the story of David and Goliath. Even if they're not familiar with the Bible. Oh yeah, I've heard somebody refer to, oh, that team's David and that team's Goliath. Usually when you hear it referred to during football season. And so David is that interesting story. Well, we find David today in a pretty incredible place. So everybody pull out your outlines with me. We're going to dive into our outlines this morning. David is facing this giant. We all have giants in our lives. So here's what we know to sort of capture the event. For 40 days, the nation of Israel has run to the battle line, has looked at Goliath and went, I don't think we can do that. I don't think we're big enough, strong enough, fast enough to go attack that giant. So they came back. So we found David last time we met, back in May. We paused. We found David back in May staring at this giant going, we aren't putting up with what this guy's doing. That's where we sort of let poor David's been on pause all summer, all right? So let's pick up the story. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 39. I'll walk through it. I think it'll pop up on the screen, and we'll talk through it together. And David strapped his sword over his armor. He tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. So Saul goes, David, you can't just go out there like you are. You need to put on my gear. You need to put on my stuff. All right, time out. How many of you, there's a leader that you sort of modeled your leadership after? Raise your hand. All right, modeling our leadership after people is a wonderful thing, but here's what I will tell you, and I think it's scriptural. God never intended you for you to be them. He created you to be you. So Saul was the valiant warrior. But remember, Saul for 40 days, he hadn't done jack squat either. That's a Greek term. All right, he hadn't done anything either. He'd stared at the giant. He didn't do anything. He was the trained guy. He was the guy the whole army was following. Saul hadn't done anything, but David's like, who's this guy talking? I'll go out and take him. And Saul's readily given up his armor to go, David, let me outfit you. Well, he's putting it on him. Well, it's just hanging off David. David tried in vain to go out in the armor that Saul had given him. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go in these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand. What did he use the staff for? To be a what? Shepherd, right? So what we see, that crook staff, he used that to be a shepherd. He would take that crook. If a sheep was running away, he would pull it back. They could use it to break the sheep's legs. That was what you used. We found Moses led with a staff. So David takes his staff, and David chooses 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he puts them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. All right, so if we are ESPN, so are any college football fans in the room? Raise your hand. Okay, listen, college football is coming this weekend. This is really bad. So Ann and I were selling our house, and people are coming at times and games are on. This is not working out real well, all right? And so Saturday, we're going to, like, between 10 and 6, there's no house showing because I got to see College Game Day. I got to see who they're picking in the games. I got to hear my wife get mad because they're going to choose against West Virginia, as they always do, and it's going to make her angry to start football season because I love to see their picks. If you were picking this game, would you have picked Goliath or David? Goliath. It's safe to say that, all right? We know how the story turned out. I would have picked Goliath. Goliath's a prohibitive favorite in the story. He's bigger, stronger, more trained, more durable, more tested. He was the guy. And David's got his staff. He's got 5 smooth stones, and he's got his little pouch. That's all David's got. David is outmanned. David, I remember pulling up at a football game a couple years ago with a coach, and he looked out, and the other team on the other side of the 50 was massive. And we're warming up down on our end, and he goes, they think we brought our JV. Look at them. They think the varsity bus got lost because the other team was so much bigger than the team we were looking at. That was what it was like looking at David. He was too small. Everything was against him. But he chose 5 smooth stones, and he had his pouch, and he had his bag. Look at what it says. And the Philistine moved forward. He came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. He couldn't believe David was even coming out for this battle. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Then the Philistine said to David, come to me and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. If you got a pen or something, I want you to underline that in your outline. That is a big statement. That's a big statement. David said, I'm not coming to you on my behalf. I'm coming to you on God's behalf. That's really, really interesting. You come at me with a sword and a spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you had defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down. I will cut off your head. Most people think David was around 14 years old. He's a cocky middle schooler, all right? And so David's like, who do you think you are coming at me like this? And I'll give the dead bones of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air, to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there's a God in Israel, and that all the assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. When the Philistine arose, he came and drew near to meet David, and David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag. He took out a stone, slung it, struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. And we know the story of David because of this day. And we've walked, 4 months to get to this point. But here's what I'm going to tell you. Goliath was just one giant in David's life. David had more that were to come. Some that came up to him on the battlefield, and some that he created. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Would you pray with me? Right where you are, would you ask God to speak to you? Man, you got an hour away from your office, phone's not on, you're not worried, hopefully not worried about the stuff that's going on outside of here. But would you ask God that while you're here, for this brief, selfish time, as Kevin said, would you just ask him to speak to you? Father, in the middle of a work day, in the middle of a crazy beginning of a week, God, thank you that you care about leaders. And that, God, you have a heart to see these men and women be their very best in the place that you put them. You put David in this valley, but you put us at that school, in that business, at that home, for a time such as this. So God, take a story that was told so many years ago and help us apply it to the world that we walk and work in. And Father, I pray this now. In Jesus' name, amen. Lesson number 1, right there on your outline. The biggest giant that I must overcome is an unbelief towards God. That's a really interesting part of the story. The biggest giant that we have to overcome is an unbelief towards God. So you got to think, here's this army. This army could have taken care of Goliath. Nobody was willing to do it. Here's why they weren't willing to do it. It wasn't just a fear of a giant. Now, I want you to write this little note down. Ready? That giant was now bigger than their God. That giant was bigger than their God. That giant, that Philistine, had become a big G, and their God that they fought for, worked for, worshiped for, had become a little g God. And the same thing can happen in our lives. Our biggest battle sometimes is unbelief. Look at that first little blank there. We often think that the biggest giant in the story is Goliath, but he's not. The biggest giant in this story is unbelief. It is the story of it's the why they got into this situation in the first place. Here's 2 great concerns of David. In unbelief among the nations, David was concerned that if this giant prevailed, then there was going to be a real problem. See, here's the battle that was drawn that day. The battle that was drawn that day was whoever won the battle was whose God you had to worship. That's why nobody wanted to fight. There was a fear of going out into that battlefield. There was a fear of walking into that. And David look at what he said, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And there was an unbelief among the people of Israel, that they now weren't believing what they thought. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because that'll make you feel awkward. But most of you, I would think, probably a lot of you probably go to church somewhere on a Sunday. And we leave Sunday feeling like we can conquer the world. And by Monday at 2 o'clock, a call has come and something's been put on our plate and it seems insurmountable. How many of y'all on Monday morning have already faced some adversity that you didn't see coming when you left the office on Friday? Raise your hand. There's new giants coming every day. And what we believe and sing about on Sunday can seem so far away by Monday at 2 o'clock. That's life. It's really hard to translate. The army would have told you, we are fighting for our God. And if you would ask them, is God not bigger than Goliath? Oh, no, he is. But yet they're worried as if he's not. David, here was the difference in David. I want you to write this little thought down. David believed in God's ability. See, faith really isn't our belief in our ability. I heard Charles Stanley say that years ago. Faith is our belief in God's ability. It's not my belief in what I can do. Faith is my belief in what God can do. What is he able to do this? And I want you to write this down. Until the object of my faith is bigger than the obstacle in front of me, I'll stay where I am. Till the object of my faith is bigger than the obstacle in front of me, I will stay where I am. I will not move past my ability to believe that God is bigger than what I'm facing. And I'm telling you, that's where some of us that we go, all right, I want to be a spiritual leader and I'm going to do this. And we start walking and all of a sudden the first obstacle comes. And baby, there's more coming, right? I mean, there's more coming. When that first obstacle hits, we find out what we really believe. I want you to write this little quote down. And Josh Webb on our staff, we were talking about this earlier. I want you to write this little quote down. I will only grow to the threshold of my pain. I will only grow to the threshold of my pain. What I'm willing to walk through with that obstacle will determine how far I can go. David was going to determine his leadership by saying, my God is bigger than this giant in this field. And here's what I love. It's one of my favorite things about Lunch with Leader. I got a good friend you're going to meet here in a few minutes, and named Roscoe, that I was telling this about earlier. What I love sitting at every table are people from all walks of life. There's people from law enforcement, people from city government. There's people from the private sector. There's people from schools. There's people from all walks of life, all right? But we all have giants. We all have giants. We have giants in ministry. You have giants in what you do. That is a fact. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a second. I'm going to give you 2 minutes at your table. And I want you to talk about why giants are so hard to face up to sometimes, all right? On your mark, I'm going to give you 2 minutes at your table. On your mark, get set, go. Talk about it at your table. Why are giants so hard to face up to in our lives? All right, another minute. All right. Let me hear from a couple of you guys. And we're small enough, I think, in here to hear it. We're not recording it. So what's the reason giants are so hard to face up to? Somebody give me a couple. Yes, ma'am. Lack of faith. Fear. Fear of failure. Pride. Feeling like you were helpless. You had no power to enter into the situation. Absolutely, you felt helpless. Anybody else? Makes you lose your focus. Obstacle right in front. And here's the crazy part. And I think this is the part we have to prepare ourselves for in leadership. Those giants come shaped differently all throughout our lives, don't they? They walk in our 20s and they look this way. And then they walk in our 30s and they look this way. And then those giants walk back in our 40s and they look this way. And they will test what you believe about God. They will test it because you'll make a decision. I'm going to be a spiritual leader. I want to make a difference where I'm at till the first phone call comes. And then you're like, all right, do I really believe this? I made a decision. I want to do that. Now I'm going to live this out. Because here's what I will do. Here's what I will tell you. And I want you to write this little thought down under number 1 and we'll move on. Unbelief will cause me to doubt God's power. Unbelief will cause me to doubt God's power and dismiss his promises. Yeah, I know he said that, but. Yeah, I know he went to that, but that was different than what I'm going through. And here's the hardest part about leadership. Hardest part about leadership then is who do you tell that to? When you're looking and going, I don't know how we're going to make it out of this. You don't just walk to somebody. If you're the leader, you don't walk to your team and go, yeah, guys, I don't think we're going to make it. That's not going to go over real well, all right? So you're trying to put on a great face. You're trying to put on the positive spin, but you're going, I don't know if we're going to make it. Everybody's been there. That's universal. We've all been there. But then once we make it through, it's like, oh, man, God came through for us. And the next one comes, we forget completely about what we went through before. It's the craziest thing. That's why I think God left us this book full of all the flaws. You know, if he had mentioned me in the book, I wish he'd have cleaned up my story a little bit. You know what I'm talking about? And so you're going to get to heaven, David's like, why did he put that in there? He didn't have to tell that. And so, but that's what we're finding David on a good day. David's going to get some giants on a bad day. And we'll walk through his life this year and you'll see him. How can we battle unbelief? So there was a dad in the New Testament, sort of jump Old Testament to New Testament. A dad in the Old Testament that came, or the New Testament came and went to Jesus and said, I want you to heal my son. I need you to heal my child. And Jesus looked at him and he asked this question. It's a great question. Do you believe? And this is what the dad said. I do believe. Help me with my unbelief. Dude, you talking about somebody you identify with in Scripture? I'm like, I'm that guy. Yeah, I think you can do it, but I don't know if you can do it. I think you can, but I'm not really sure you want to do it for me. How many of y'all find yourself in that category a lot? I find myself there. I'll stand up and say something on a Sunday and we'll go through something. And Ann's like, didn't you mention that in church? I'm like, yeah, it's different to live it though. I mean, it's very different. I mean, I'm selling it on Sunday, so it's a little different. But we find ourselves in that place of going, man, I don't know. So how do we fortify this unbelief? I want you to write down a couple things. How do we battle it? We read God's word. Man, put it away. Keep reminding yourself of what he said. Respond to his word. Not only read it, respond to it. Do something with it and refer to it. Refer to it. Go back and back and back. God, I think you've got this for me. All right? Lesson number 2. The biggest decision I must make is to confront my Goliath. We've got to make a decision. I am not going to stay in neutral. I am going to confront my Goliath. I'm not letting him stand in the valley. I heard John Maxwell say this years ago. Jason Stoughton in the room works for the John Maxwell Company. And I heard John say this years ago, do you think the giant looked bigger on the 40th day or the first day? He looked bigger on the 40th day because he had hung out in the valley. The longer you put off dealing with your giant, it does not get smaller. So years ago, my dad passed in February of 2017. My dad was in business 44, 46 years, same company, and he was executive VP there, and he had to let people, he didn't say let people go. He had to help people choose a new career, is what he used to say. And so he had to help people find a new future. And so I was dealing with an issue. This was years ago at North Star, and he's like, I would sort of bounce it off of him. What would you do? And he's like, well, did you have that conversation with him? I'm like, no. And, and I hate confrontation. I'm like, the week wasn't good, and it just wasn't good for him. And he's like, that's good. This conversation's going to get easier. It is. That's good. I'm glad you put it off the next week. Hey, did you talk to him? No, it wasn't a good. That's good. If you'll wait till Christmas, it's going to get a lot better if you'll just keep putting it off. Why? Giants just keep getting bigger. And he's like, Mike, the longer you put it off, the bigger it's going to get. David made a decision early to confront his Goliath. Look at what it says, 1 Samuel 17. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, I want you to underline this phrase, and David ran quickly. Underline that. That says a lot about David's disposition. David didn't meekly walk to the battle line and question himself. David ran quickly. It means David was ready to go. There was no question in David's mind what was about to go down. I remember it was my sophomore year maybe at Liberty. We went and played Fresno State University. Fresno State that year in baseball had 8 number 1 draft picks on the team. They went up on us 16-0 in the first inning. If you don't follow baseball, you don't get mercy ruled in the first, all right? And so all of us, I was a reliever, and they looked at the bullpen. I'm like, my arm's sore. I don't think I can go today, Coach. I don't think I have it in me. And here's what I will tell you about that team. Here's what I remember about them. From 1 through 9, this is what I remember. Every other team, they take the bat, they throw it to the side, and they walk to the plate. This is no lie. They sprinted to home plate. They sprinted, and by the time you picked up the ball, they were already in the batter's box. And it was one of the most intimidating things. I think they were all happy we were there, all right? And so they were upping their batting averages that day. But they sprinted. David ran quickly, which shows David was trusting that he was going to get this thing. Here's what David wasn't doing. I want you to write down this word. David wasn't worrying. David wasn't worrying about whether God was going to come through or not. Worry is a powerless tool. Why is worry so powerless? What would y'all say? you achieve nothing. Gets nothing done. How many of y'all, honestly, we're in a room with friends, there's things you worry about? Raise your hand. Yep. If you worried about whether to raise your hand, you worry. All right, so I don't know. Yeah, you're a worrier. I can lean on that side. I can lean on that side. Man, all worry is prayers I say to myself. When I worry, I'm going, okay, I got to meet this need for me. That does no good. David ran quickly. Principle, big problems typically don't go away on their own. We must address them rather than ignore them. David addressed the problem. Find me a great leader, and I will find you somebody who doesn't let things sit. So going into college football, you may not like them if you're a Georgia fan. Nick Saban, great leader. He's built a great team. I was watching a little thing they did on him yesterday. They have a 90-year-old referee that referees all their practices. I don't know if any of y'all saw that ESPN segment. He referees all their practices. 90 years old. He's been reffing for their practices since Bear Bryant was there. And this is what the guy said. He said, Coach Saban has no problem telling me how he feels. That's what the referee said. This guy, they pay him to ref practice, and Saban calls him. He told him he's the second best ref he's ever seen, and everybody else he's ever seen were better. All right, and that's what he said. And so the guy goes, I don't really know how to take that. But he said, here's what I'll tell you. He addresses problems. There's a problem, he addresses it. David learned a great art in leadership. David addressed the problem quickly. David dove into the problem right out of the chute. Look at what Dale Carnegie said. Do the thing you fear to do and keep on doing it. That is the quickest and surest way ever to get this ever yet discovered to conquer fear. Dive into it. I am not that way. When it comes to conflict, I don't like conflict. I just don't like it. But something I've learned in 21 years of being here, it's just part of the job. Part of it. There's people that don't get along. My family, there's times we don't get along. There's people in any organization, there's times people don't see eye to eye on stuff. The biggest decision I must make is to confront my Goliath. And here's what I will tell you. Because of the lives you all live, in all the different worlds of life that you're all in, your Goliaths all look different and they're all the same. They're big to you. That's what I will tell you. Well, it's not a big deal. No, it's big to you. Whether it's having enough money at the end of the month for your business, or whether it's an employee that's gone sideways, or whether it's a tough situation you got to confront. Principle number 3, the biggest truth I must remember as a child of God is always with me. Let's think about this for a second. What if we really led like God is always with us? What would that give you? If you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt God was going to work it all out, how would you lead differently? What would that make you? God's with you. He's got you. What would that make you? Fearless, confident, bold. What else? How many of you would say, if I told you, okay, God's right there with you. He's going to, I know this looks insurmountable, but God is going to see you through this. How many of you would be more timid? No. How many of you would be, well, I'm gonna lay up at night. I'm gonna worry myself sick about this. We wouldn't do that either, because we go, you know what? God's got this. Remember the story of Joseph in the Old Testament? All throughout his story, and God was with Joseph, and God was with Joseph, and God was with Joseph, and God was with Joseph. And Joseph evidently, I think there was a piece in his life. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. So my new giant is this, and my new giant's this. But God's got me. Joshua. Remember, Moses dies. Joshua's the guy. And God looks at him 3 different times and said, Joshua, be strong and very courageous. Be strong and very courageous. Be strong and very courageous. And this is the way he closed it. For the Lord God is with you wherever you will go. And I want everybody to look at me. And the promise is no different than you, for you. God's with you too. You don't leave your faith on a shelf on Sunday. It affects every area of your life. And let me tell you what what I think makes a proud father in heaven, when on Monday you trust him as much as you did on Sunday. And you go, God, I know you got this. I know this. If you're, how many of y'all are in the education world? You're from a school, all right? Lots of you guys in the room. Sometimes there's parents that don't agree with you. I've heard that happens occasionally, all right, in our school system. And so that a parent's coming in and buddy, they got smoke coming out of their ears. And you're like, some of y'all have common stories, I have a feeling. But anyways, and so there's smoke coming out of their ears. And you're like, how am I going to get through this? You're going to get through it. God's going to give you the wisdom, and God's going to guide you, and God's going to get you through. Trust the process. Look at what it says here. Psalm 23:4. Even though I walk through the valley, and I want you to underline this little phrase, of the shadow of death. So the psalmist David says, even though I walk through the valley of the what? Shadow of death. What creates shadow? Light nearby. There's never a dark passageway you walk through that there's not a bright light that's close by. Just keep walking. I'm just telling you. I think David was a little naive. I think David was young. So I will say this, I'm 49 now. I take less risk as a 49-year-old than I did as a 28-year-old. You get safer as you get older. Do y'all find that? I mean, you're just like, well, I got more at stake, and I got a family, all that stuff. When I was 28, man, we're jumping into changing church, starting a church, and it's crazy. It was nuts. Doesn't make any sense, but we did it. But as we get older, we get a little safer, because I think our faith becomes more in our ability than in God's ability. That's at least for me. Y'all probably a little better off than me, but that's what I do sometimes. And I think that there's times that I forget that God is with me. Courage comes from believing my God is bigger than any obstacle I'll face. Giants put us to the test. Here's my choice. Be cowering tent dweller or a courageous giant killer. That's our choice. I can be a cowering tent dweller. All right. Do we know the names of any of the guys that were in the army that ran up there for 40 days besides King Saul and his brothers who are mentioned in the story? Do we know any of the rest of their names? Nope, because tent dwellers are always forgotten. Giant killers are always remembered. Even if they swung and missed, they had the guts to go give it a shot. So what's it look like to live this out? So today, we're so blessed, man. We had a big Sunday here at North Star yesterday, and so if you were here, you got to meet this guy. But I guess over 10 years ago, and we'll get in the exact times, I remember it was probably 12 years ago, he was sitting out in this crowd, and he and his wife came up, and they said, we want to plant a church. That's awesome, man. Here's a great city to do it in. Go to Baltimore. It's a great city. It's a growing city. Go to downtown Atlanta, man. There's a lot of stuff. And he said, we're feeling called to Clifton Park, New York. Upstate, how many of y'all are from upstate New York? Anybody in the room? All right. So he's from they had family up there, but he said, we're feeling called to Clifton Park, New York. That is not like a burgeoning place of church plants, all right? And so it's not like people are going, we need a new church up here. They didn't even know they needed to go to church. 98% of the community was unchurched when they showed up. 98%. And he and his wife went up there and planted a church and faced some giants during that time. So I want y'all to welcome to the stage today a good friend of mine, Dr. Roscoe Lilly. Come on up, Roscoe. See you, baby. Good to see you. So tell everybody a little bit of the story of what got you guys, why you chose Clifton Park, and then why you wished you hadn't have chosen Clifton Park after you did it.
Oh, yeah. Well, like you said, my wife and her family are from that area of upstate New York. And going and spending some time with her father and working in his business that he has a patent on a locker handle. And spending time up there, that their family would drive 20 minutes to church. And it wasn't like they passed a lot of other churches on the way. That was the only church that they went to. And that just really surprised me. And so we just felt more and more that God was calling us to start a church in upstate New York. So we were ordained here at North Star Atlanta, right here on this stage. So it was so exciting to be back this weekend and see all that God has done here and celebrate with you. And so we went up to Clifton Park, and we were all excited. We hold our first service, And we were just, we're ready for all the people who are going to show up, but no one shows up but my own family the first Sunday. But we're like, that's okay. Maybe we just didn't pray hard enough. We're going to pray harder this time, this week. So we had our second service. No one shows up. I'm like, all right, well, maybe I just didn't preach hard enough. Maybe I didn't lift Jesus up. Scripture says, if Jesus is lifted up high, all men will be drawn to him. So maybe I just didn't preach Jesus hard enough. So I'm going to preach Jesus really hard this week. So I preach, no one comes. So then the fourth Sunday, maybe just because we didn't fast, so let's spend this week fasting, and God's going to do something. And we spent that fourth week, and no one shows up but my family. I remember looking at my wife and just being so heartbroken. I felt like God placed this dream in our heart, but nothing was changing, nothing was happening, and obviously no one is showing up. This whole area, of upstate New York, of Albany, you hear statistics. George Barna says the Capital District of New York, which is where we live at, is the #1 post-Christian city in America. It's no joke. Like I did a message on Jonah before I left for study break, and a guy who's 55 comes up to me afterwards. He's like, I have never, ever heard that story before about Jonah. I'm like, wait, you've never heard the story of Jonah? Like, ever? Like, Vacation Bible School? They're like, no, I've never been to church before. It's my first time. My assistant, I was telling her something, and I said, Billy Graham says this, and she's like, okay, that's fine. Well, we can do that. She's writing it down. She's like, hey, can I ask you one question? I was like, yeah. She's like, who is Billy Graham? I'm like, you're kidding me. Like, you've never heard of Billy Graham before. So in that kind of environment, I liken it to, like, how do you sell hot dogs to vegetarians, right? It's just like, it is. What would you say that would make a vegetarian want a hot dog? Or if I asked you, like, would you want a tattoo? Like, do you want a tattoo? And some of you are like, well, no, I wouldn't want a tattoo. I said, well, what if I told you the guy who gives a tattoo is really funny? Would that change your mind? You're like, no. Like, what if they tell you that they play amazing music where you get your tattoo? Would that change your mind? You're like, no. Like, what if they have this great place for your kids to hang out while you get a tattoo? Would that change your mind? You're like, no, I don't base a decision on a tattoo based on how funny the guy is or music or kids. And that really was the challenge that we found ourselves in, was how do we help people want to get a tattoo of Jesus, is the challenge that we faced. And I started reading through the Gospels, and in Matthew where Jesus said, I didn't come to be served but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for other people. And I felt like God just asked me in that moment, is that why you moved to Clifton Park? Did you move to be a servant, or did you move to be a celebrity? Did you hope to be as well known as Mike Lynch is, or did you really move here?
That'd be a sad thing to look up to, actually.
Or did you really want to be a servant there? So, fast forward, this Easter we had over 700 people there, and so it's a slow slog fest, grinding it out in that area of reaching people for Christ, but we love it.
So that wasn't just the only giant you faced. Every time a new giant comes, Roscoe, what do you have to remind yourself of to attack that giant? Because they've changed by the seasons.
Absolutely.
I remember you telling me in a phone call that your daughter, I think, was going in middle school, and she was the only believer that you knew of in the school. Correct?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. She's in health class. They're teaching her that there's 52 different genders. I'm like, I thought there was 2, like maybe 3. 52 different genders. Our school district is the first one that has transgender bathrooms. So it's a totally different world than what we grow up, or what I grew up in. But you're exactly right about the different seasons. I called Mike 2 years ago. We were in a building project. We just finished it, and our project manager comes to us and says, hey, I underestimated this, and we are $150,000 over budget. Like, we owe that right now, and we have to figure out how to pay that, and the project is still 3 months away from being finished. I remember calling Mike. I'm like, Mike, what in the world do I do? Mike's like, yep, that's a big giant you got there, buddy.
Resume.
I know. But you know what Mike said? He gave me some great advice I've never forgotten. He's like, Roscoe, here's the thing. He said, on the other side of this giant, in 6 months, you'll be past this. You'll be beyond this. I'm thinking, there's no way. I'll be dead. I'll be run out of town in 6 months. He said, listen, you're going to be on the other side of this in 6 months. He said, but what you want to make sure is that your character is still intact, that the integrity of your church is still intact. So whatever decisions that you make as you move forward with this giant, don't give up your integrity. I'm just so grateful for that advice. I mean, you would think that that should be front of the mind, but when you're in the middle of those giants, you hear all these different voices. You know what? Hey, contractors are used to not getting paid. Just let them keep working. Don't take them off the job. Figure out some way around it. But that advice really was just a North Star for us as we head in that moment. So thank you for that.
What challenge would you say to somebody today that's facing a giant? You know, these guys, they've got, you know, they're leading all types of different organizations. They're trying to make a difference. What advice would you give them today, Roscoe?
I think what you said earlier was so great about really having some friends that understand what it's like, that they've faced some giants, that they would help you to share some of those feelings, those emotions that you can't share with your team, or you can't share with other people who work with you, or some other environment at church, that you'd have another friend that you could go to who understands that you would be able to share with it. I'd say don't give up your character. I think that's a big thing. I think, you know, what was a book that I could read that could help me with this, or who do I know that I could call that could ask me for this? And I think the last thing I would say is just, you know, keep your tent pitched in the land of hope. There's this beautiful psalm that Peter quotes in Acts chapter 2 in the Message, and he says that, he quotes David saying, pitch your tent in the land of hope. And I think sometimes when you're facing those giants, you know, you pitch your tent in the land of fear or despair or worry, as opposed to where do I want to orient myself, that I do have a choice of where I want to pitch my tent, and to say that, you know, sometimes it's enough just to pitch your tent towards hope, that just the warmth of that begins drawing you in. And I'm just so thankful for your friendship, Mike, over the years, just having someone to call. And you'll never, I think in leadership, you'll never face a time where you're not going to be facing some giant, as long as you're moving forward. I mean, right now, a giant that we're facing is that this building that we just renovated and signed a lease on, we got notified that the owner is being foreclosed on. So we're just like, oh my goodness, what does that mean for us in the future? And how do we handle this? And what does that look like? And so it's easy, I think, to always to put your tent in a land of fear or worry, as opposed to saying that, no, I really do believe that God has the ability to take all things and bring good out of them. And that Psalm 23 where it says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Not that only those things happen to us, but those things, God brings those up in the rear for our life.
That's so awesome. Would y'all thank Roscoe for being here today? What I love about the story of David is David said, man, how can I not beat this guy? I beat the lion and I beat the bear. This guy's nothing. I think so many times we forget the things we've been through to get us where we got to. That's why people talk about journaling. Write down, because then you can look back and go, oh yeah, I remember that season when God brought me through that. The problem with leaders is many times you're moving so fast ahead, you don't hit pause to look back and go, look at all the ways God was faithful to me. Look at all the ways that God came through for me. If he came through for me on this, he's going to come through for me on this. Back in the Old Testament, they used to have a great tradition. The tradition was they would create memorial stones. So whenever something great would happen, they would create a memorial stone. So they would take their kids and their grandkids back to say, look at where God was faithful in this season. And if God was faithful then, guess what? He's going to be faithful now. Here's what I would tell you as I wrap today. God put you where he put you. And God's got you where he's got you. And God's going to see you from where you are to where you need to be. Don't run ahead of him. Don't fall behind him. Walk with him. And it's a day-by-day journey. And here's what I'll tell you. At the end of that journey, there will be no regrets of what you wished you would have done. You'll be glad you did what you did because you trusted in him the whole way. Let me pray for us. Father, I am honored, truly honored. These amazing people took time out of their crazy, busy Monday schedule to come here. God, I pray that we won't leave and say, well, that was good. I met some new people. God, I pray we leave and go, okay, God, you're sending me back to this office. You're sending me back to this place. So, God, you've got something for me. And, God, may we find that something. And, God, for those that walked in this room today and I said giant, and, buddy, I thought, a person, a place, a thing, a payment, whatever that was that popped in their mind, Father, I pray that their view of that little g giant will never be bigger than their view of the God that hung the stars in space and knew their name before they were ever created and gave up his life through his son for them. God, I pray they'll never, I'll throw myself in, we will never let our little G giants get bigger than you. God, may we have that faith that David had. And God, may we make a difference in our generation the way he did. And God, if we do that, then we've lived out the life you called us to live. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Would you guys give Mike a round of applause and thank him and Roscoe for what they shared today? All right, as you get ready to leave, I got 4 things for you. 4 things really quick. The first thing, you guys should have received one of these cards. Everybody have one of these cards when you walked in? They're on the table. Why don't you pick one of these up? There are dates for the rest of the school year. So here's what my challenge to you. I've already done it sitting there. I would go and put these dates in your calendar and make a plan to be here at the next Lunch with the Leader. The next one is on September 17th. Really important, if you didn't get an email for today, if you didn't get an email for this, you can go to northstarchurch.org/lunch, and you can get on the list so that you receive those, and then you can be the one inviting other people. So that's number 1, is go put these dates on the calendar and definitely show up. The second, on the other side of that, you got a picture of Mike Lynch right there, which is, this, you should get him to autograph this. This is awesome. He's going to hate that. Okay, there is a podcast, and if you haven't been listening to this podcast, Mike does a really cool thing. What I love about this is, Mike, the podcast isn't about you, and I've seen you lead that way, and it's incredible. You sit down with some of the best leaders in America, and you interview them and ask them questions, and we get a chance to listen in and glean insights from that. So I'd encourage you to listen to those. If you need some encouragement, some leadership tools in between now and the next one, that's a great way to get it. I love that old Zig Ziglar quote. He said that some people say motivation doesn't last. And he said, neither does bathing. That's why we recommend it daily. So if you need a shot of leadership, check out the podcast. 2 more things. Go eat at Chick-fil-A. Support Andy Duncan and their Chick-fil-A. They're incredible. Give them one more round of applause for what they've done. Lunch with a Leader on the calendar. Lunch with a Leader podcast. Eat at Chick-fil-A. And lastly, go and confront the giants, the people